Hey friend, if you struggle with color mixing and understanding what colors to mix together to achieve certain colors, then this video is going to be a deep dive on undertones, temperatures, color theory, and understanding how color really works. And I'm going to also teach you how to become more of an observer of color instead of just hoping that the colors that I mix together are going to work out and be the best combinations. So if you struggle with color mixing or really want to amp up the knowledge in the color mixing department, then let's dive in. Okay, so the next most common question I've received this last year about watercolor is about mixing paint. So in this exercise, we talked about water and pigment. So mixing water and pigment and the ratios, the consistency. The same kind of steps are going to be applied to mixing two colors together. So within mixing two colors, three colors, however many colors, you're also going to want to think about consistency. So we want to start here because that's going to build our foundation for consistency and also values. Because the thing with mixing and color and understanding color is if you really dive deep into the world of color theory, which I've covered in multiple videos on this channel, and I cover a lot in my books, everyday watercolor books. But the thing with mixing colors is you're not just talking about the hue or the actual color. So if you look at a traditional color wheel or any color wheel online, you'll see, the red, blue, and yellow are your primary colors. Secondary colors are blue, orange, and green. And then you have your tertiary colors, which are your hyphenated names like red, orange, or yellow, orange. And those are leaning towards one primary color or the other, depending on the ratio of the pigments that you have or the consistency and ratio of those pigments. But along with hue, you have obviously value. So the consistency of water that you have to that mixture of those colors is going to determine how light that value is or how dark that value is of that color. And then, so like this wheel, for example, has a dark value of blue and midtones and then your lighter tones. And then you get that with your oranges, your greens, or whatever color you're mixing up. With the more water you have on your mixture, you're going to have a lighter versus a darker. But then along with that, you have temperature. So there are, for example, there are warm and cool colors. If you split a color wheel from your yellow all the way to your red, violet, those are going to be your warm colors. And then you have your blues and greens, and blue violet is going to be your cool colors. But not even that, even more to that. And I'm only going to briefly talk about this, but you have warm greens and cool greens. So if we look at this color mixing chart, which I'll explain how to do in a second, you're going to have some greens that are way more cool. So like this turquoise and yellow combination will give you a blue undertone. So temperature of the color is going to be really important to notice versus sap green mixed with cadmium orange is going to give you a brownish, reddish undertone. So that would be a warm green. So within colors, you have warm and cool versions of those colors. And I mentioned this in this exercise up here, but understanding color and undertones, temperature, warm and cool, and consistency is going to be really important. And so I already mentioned this before, but 75% of what you do as a painter is in observation. So looking at the scene that you're painting, maybe you're painting an ocean seascape like this one, and noticing what time of day it is, and where the sun or where the light source is and how it's hitting the water. What undertones do you see in the ocean? Do you see any warm tones? Do you see mostly cool tones? How light do the lights get and how dark do the darks get? And that will affect how you mix color and how you pull out color from the photo you're referencing or from the actual subject. So obviously, consistency is important in color mixing because you understand the value of the color, and then also the combination or the undertones that you are seeing from your reference will inform what two colors or multiple colors you use in mixing those colors. So if you don't have a background or an understanding, at least a basic understanding of color theory, I would hop to those videos quick. We'll link them in this video because we're going to kind of jump to a couple of things that will help you with color mixing and color ratios. Another thing to think about with watercolor mixing mixing colors is about granulating. So some colors will granulate or kind of separate once they're on the paper more than others. For example, Prussian blue and lemon yellow deep, opera rose and lemon yellow deep are some examples. And I really like that texture. I think it creates a fun, textured, nuancy look. Some people get really bothered by it, but you want to keep an eye out for that, and you can definitely continue to mix the wet combination on your paper so that it stays not separated before it dries. But if you're not picking that up and noticing it, then it will separate. But then other colors don't really separate. Like for example, Prussian blue, if I mix it with Scarlet Lake to make purple, those colors don't really separate. So let's just talk about ratios. So when we're talking about color mixing, we're thinking about ratios, we're thinking about consistency, and we're thinking about temperature or undertones. And doing a mixing chart more like this is going to give you a really good grasp of the colors in your palette and what undertones those mixtures will give you. But again, this is just combining two colors. You can combine, so for example, I have all of my colors laid out at the top and all of them laid out on the side. So this first mix is just lemon yellow deep together, then lemon yellow deep and yellow ochre, lemon yellow deep and cadmium orange, lemon yellow deep and opera rose, lemon yellow deep and Scarlet Lake, Prussian blue, etc., all the way down my palette. And then for the same colors across here. So this is a really great exercise to do in understanding the undertones and what you get as a result from mixing these two colors in your palette in 50-50 ratios. However, there's so much more that you can get from just these 12 colors I have in my palette with the consistency or lightness and darkness of the value of the color, but also the amount of the ratio. So if I have, for example, only 25% or 10% or whatever lemon yellow deep in my mixture, it's going to give me a much different result than when I have 50-50 Prussian blue and lemon yellow deep versus 75% lemon yellow deep and Prussian blue. So play around with those exercises and a mixing chart like that to get a good sense of what colors you have in your palette. But some colors will really surprise you, some mixtures. So I'm just going to mix up a simple mixture of Prussian blue and Scarlet Lake. I've got like a milky consistency here to pull out what we did in this exercise. So then I'm going to rinse that Prussian blue off in my water cup, and I'm going to grab some Scarlet Lake. And this is when you become an observer. Actually, throughout your entire experience, when you sit down to paint, you're an observer more than you are a painter. But looking at the consistency and also the hue or the color in my palette. So right now, with the amount of red that I have on my brush and mixed in with Prussian blue, I have a very cool temperatured purple. So if I want that to be more in the middle range purples, then I would grab a little bit more Scarlet Lake until I get that to move to a warmer, like in between purple. And if I want it to be a warm purple or red violet, then obviously I would grab more of that red. And then along with that, we're thinking about consistency. So if I'm going to my paper and I want to see it spread, and I'm maybe doing wet and wet technique and I want to see it spread really quickly and kind of like spread all over a bigger area, then I'm going to want to pay attention to the consistency of my mixture in my palette before I go to my paper as well. So this is going to give us kind of a milky cream consistency, and we have the hue is a very middle ratio of blue and red. So we're gonna try that on our paper. So we've got a milky consistency and a nice, it's a little leaning towards the cool temperature. And then with that, you can obviously lighten that consistency and get lighter purples or darker purples depending on the consistency of the pigment and water ratios. But this is where you start to really need to become more of an explorer along with being an observer when you're painting with watercolor. So for example, what would happen if I added burnt umber to this color? We would get a really not smoky, but natural, I'm running out of brown, natural undertone to our purple. Let's see if that's a nif. To our purple, and we would get this really beautiful, what would you call this color? Really beautiful purpley brown. I really wanted to come up with a more romantic name for this, but we're just gonna call it a really beautiful purpley brown. But look at the difference in hue with just adding a touch of burnt umber to the same mixture that we have. We have Scarlet Lake, Prussian blue, and I just grabbed a touch of burnt umber and we have this softened, beautiful purpley brown. And again, we can get a thicker consistency with more pigment if we wanted to, and darken it as well with more pigment in equal amounts, or if we want it to lean more brown or more blue or more red. So really studying with combinations of just two colors and seeing how it shifts the hue with adding one more color, or we can add a fourth color. Get really funky. Let's see what happens when we add yellow ochre. So this is going to be still in that somewhat brown undertone. However, yellow and purple are contrasting colors. So when you're color mixing, you want to think about, and this is why we linked to my color theory videos, but when you're mixing colors, you want to think about opposing colors on the color wheel, because contrasting colors usually makes muddy colors. So let's see what happens when we add yellow ochre. It'd probably be more drastic of a muddiness if we used lemon yellow deep, because it's a brighter yellow mixed with a brighter purple. And this is more of like a brownish undertone. But as you can see, mixing with the purple and yellow ochre, we're getting this grayish, murky purple. And there's nothing wrong with muddy colors. It's just going to give you a very different result. So we have this kind of murkiness or muddiness from this brownish purple. Purple is now just the undertone of this color. It's mostly brown, a brown gray. So again, if you want something to look more muted or murky, smoky, then you would add the contrasting color to like thicken it, darken it, and to make it a little bit smokier or muddier, whatever word you want to use. But these are just some of the examples of ranges you can get with color mixing. So if you're using two color combinations, two colors together, so doing a primary color like blue and a primary color like red, or you could do red and yellow, etc. And then obviously getting a different value of that same mixture by doing a consistency ratio exercise, and then adding one maybe more neutral color to it to see how it affects the shade or how it affects the hue of the color. So for example, we used a brown. You could use black if we did, Prussian blue and Scarlet Lake again, a little bit more blue. Just show what a different neutral or color will do to the mixture versus brown. So black. A lot of people think, oh, to darken a color, I just add black, but that's not usually what happens. So sometimes black just takes out the saturation of a color and makes it like a gray. This is a purpley gray, which is beautiful. Beautiful color if you're painting and needing some grays. But if you want to darken a color a little bit more effectively and still keep the saturation of the color, I would recommend adding the contrasting color to it and just thickening the ratio or the consistency of the mixture so that it gets darker or more opaque. So now let's try this exercise with a different color. So maybe let's do, if you have a mixing chart, you can see some colors that you'd maybe want to try out. I loved how Opera Rose and Sap Green came out together. Actually, let's do that. Opera Rose and Sap Green was a really surprising one for me because you think Opera Rose pink is a version of, similar to red. Pink and red are similar almost in hue. So red and green are contrasting colors. So you think, oh, automatically I'm probably not going to like that because I don't really like muddy or murky colors. It's just not my style. But I loved this like soft kind of blushy brown we got from it. So I'm going to come up here to a somewhat clean section of my palette and get equal mixture of Opera Rose, equal mixture of Sap Green. Or actually, let's start with the least amount of Sap Green on my brush, or just a touch of Sap Green in this Opera Rose mixture. And it just mutes or, takes the edge off the neon quality of Opera Rose just a little bit and makes it like a really soft pink. And I love it. And then we're going to add just a couple swashes from my brush of green, which was a little bit too much. So we're gonna add a little bit more pink. So now we've got like a pinkish brown. And again, we have different values inside of these mixtures with the consistency exercise. So you can add more water to make it a lighter value. And now we're moving into some greens that we could use in our floral paintings that are more natural or more sagey undertone, or browns for stems by using Opera Rose and Sap Green instead of just using burnt umber or whatever brown you have straight from the tube. So this is what opens up a whole world of exploration. Like, I love this green. It's a very foresty, smoky sage green. And we use Sap Green and Opera Rose to get this. Typically, when I'm mixing like a sagey green, I'll do Sap Green and burnt umber. But I love that you get this warmer pink undertone in this green. And then adding a little bit more green to that mixture. And you just get like the edge taken off of Sap Green a little bit. So it's not as bright green. It's a little bit more, there's a tiny bit of a brown undertone. So for color mixing, you want to think about a few things. You want to think about, obviously, the ratio of pigments, whatever you're mixing. So like I mentioned before, just a little bit of one color versus half and half ratios versus the opposite color having more in the mixture than the other. You want to think about undertones or the temperature of the color. So for both of these on this side, we're getting that warm brownish undertone. That's going to give you the more natural, organic looking look to your painting. So if you're doing a floral painting and you don't want it to be as vibrant or as saturated looking, maybe adding colors to your mixing that will make it more of a brown undertone. So that doesn't just mean adding brown to your mixture like we did for the purples. That could mean, pink and green together because they're pretty much contrasting colors, making it that undertone. And then again, thinking about how to soften or lighten a color with value and consistency. And once you start bringing in not just two combinations of colors, you want to kind of act like a scientist a little bit. So you want to put on your science hat a little bit. I don't know if it's actually science or what, but for example, the purple up here where it got really murky and kind of a grayish undertone, we added yellow instead of black. So contrasting colors usually mute and muddy the color. So if you want that, or you are noticing that your colors are getting really muddy, it's probably because you're adding a contrasting color, or brown or black will do that too. So keep in mind as you're mixing your colors that you need to be an observer. You need to really look closely at the colors that you're referencing in a photo or a live subject or whatever you're looking at, and pull out the undertones, pull out the temperature, the coolness or the warmness, pull out the values, and then obviously the actual hue itself. So do you see pinks? Do you see reds? And really studying the differences between your pinks and your reds and your oranges and studying the differences between yellow-orange versus red-orange versus orange 50-50 ratio. So I would recommend watching our color theory videos, but then also doing a chart like this. So you can pencil out a graph. I have 12 colors on top, 12 colors on the side. So however many colors you want to study, you can start with just 3. You can start with 1. Well, actually, no, that would be very boring. So don't just start with 1. 3 or 5, or you can go for all 12. So I've got my mini squares up here with 12 squares, and then everything in between. Used a ruler to space it out, but yellow and yellow, lemon yellow deep and lemon yellow deep combined, and then yellow ochre and all the way down. And it's the same order for the top and the side. And you'll get a beautiful chart, and you'll see a lot of fun mixtures that you never would have thought would have been a good combination without doing a chart like this. And then you can use this as reference. And then when you come to a color that is maybe surprising to you, or you want to explore a little more, then do a little ratio swatch. So for example, Opera Rose and Sap Green, like I mentioned, were really fascinating to me. The result was this with the 50-50 ratio up here. So I wanted to explore what it would look like if I added more green to it over time. And obviously we got more of like this brown, greenish brown undertone. Another fun combo I liked was Opera Rose and Burnt Umber. So this is the 50-50 ratio swatch here that was up here in the chart. And then I added more burnt umber slightly to each mixture as I made my swatches. And it gives you this brighter brown. It's not like a smoky brown, it's a brighter brown. And then Prussian blue and burnt umber was a fun, dark, really dark green. So obviously this is, if we added more sap green to this like here, it gives us a smoky green. This is also a smoky green, but this one is much lighter than Prussian blue and burnt umber, which this is Opera Rose and Sap Green. So there's a whole world of color just waiting for you to explore within your palette by doing these simple exercises like the mixing chart and pulling out these exercises, adding in different neutrals or even black and contrasting colors to see what comes of it. I hope that video was helpful for you. You learned some things, super insightful. This was just one part of a video on the Complete Beginner's Guide to Watercolor where I tackle the 3 most common questions that I get with watercolor. So I've been teaching watercolor for almost a decade now, and I get these questions over and over and over again. It doesn't matter if you're a beginner or more advanced watercolorist. These are by far the most 3 most common watercolor questions that I get. So check out that big video where you can find all 3 of those inside of that main video on the Complete Beginner's Guide series that we've done. And if you found something that was insightful in this video, or you want to learn more about a specific topic, drop it in the comments below. I would love to read it and tackle it in one of my tutorials. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.